Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into the intense ideological battle that has really shaped our modern world. We're going to break down the story of the welfare state, drawing on Asbjørn Wahl's analysis of its origins, the powerful forces that tried to tear it down, and the struggle over its future that's still going on today. Okay, so let's get into it by looking at two totally competing visions for how a society should run. On one side, you've got the high tax model, like in the Nordic countries. The source material points out that they tend to do a better job with social goals, things like economic equality and a strong safety net. And what's really fascinating is they pull this off without any major hit to their overall economy. Then on the other side, you have the low tax model, which you see more in places like the US and the UK. Sure, they've had slightly higher growth at certain times, but the source notes that this comes with much heavier social costs, the very things a US judge once called the price we pay for a civilized society. So you have to wonder, how did the welfare state even come to be? It's easy to picture it as some kind of generous project, but the source we're looking at argues the reality was, well, way more intense. It wasn't a gift handed down from the powerful. It was a hard-won, really uneasy compromise that was forged in the fire of serious social conflict. To really get this, we got to go back in time. Think about the Industrial Revolution. Working conditions were just brutal, and because of that, labor movements were getting stronger and a lot more radical. So leaders at the time, like Germany's Iron Chancellor Otto von Bismarck, they basically saw the writing on the wall. He introduced the very first social insurance policies, but not out of the goodness of his heart. No, it was a strategic play to calm down a restless workforce and make socialism look a lot less appealing. And this quote from a British prime minister just perfectly sums up the political thinking. The welfare state was built, at least in part, out of fear. Fear of strikes, of unrest, and fear of a full-blown revolution. It was a concession, plain and simple, designed to keep the peace. All right, let's fast forward to the mid-20th century. After all the chaos of the Great Depression and World War II, this model really got locked in. You had these historic compromises between workers and business owners, and big international agreements like Bretton Woods, which set up a whole new system for global money. All this kicked off what many now call the golden age of capitalism, a time of incredible prosperity that was actually shared pretty widely. So what did this grand bargain actually look like in practice? Well, as you can see here, it was all built on a few key pillars. Governments promised to keep people employed and to keep a lid on financial markets. In return, people got things like publicly funded healthcare and education, better social security, and strong unions fighting in their corner. And for all this security, labor movements generally agreed to let management run the show at work. It was a delicate balance, for sure, but for a while there, it worked. But that golden age, well, it wasn't going to last forever. By the 1970s, the economy was in turmoil, and that created an opening for a huge ideological shift, a kind of counter-revolution that went right after the very foundations of the welfare state. Now, this change didn't just happen out of nowhere. Oh no, it was heavily funded and it was strategically organized. A whole new intellectual machine popped up in the form of think tanks. The source calls them paid idea factories, and that's a pretty good description. Places like the Heritage Foundation in the US and the Adam Smith Institute in the UK were bankrolled by corporate money to just pump out a constant stream of reports and arguments for a totally different way of running the economy. And this basically lays out their playbook. The strategy was crystal clear. First, deregulate finance. Let money fly around the globe wherever it wants. Second, privatize public stuff. Sell off everything from utilities to transport. Third, go after the unions and weaken their power. And finally, push for free trade deals that put market access above everything else. And these ideas found their political champions in leaders like Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. They didn't just talk about this stuff. They turned it into actual government policy. And from there, big international bodies like the IMF and the World Bank became the tools they used to export this model all over the world, often by making it a condition for getting a loan. So, what happened? What was the result of this massive policy shift? The source we're looking at details a huge impact, arguing that the consequences weren't just numbers on a spreadsheet, they were real, tangible changes in the lives of millions of people. And this is crucial. This wasn't some polite, quiet policy debate. This was an open battle. And the first target was organized labor. Two really high-profile strikes became these symbolic turning points. The U.S. air traffic controllers strike, where Reagan just fired over 11,000 workers, and the UK miners' strike, which was this bitter, year-long struggle that ended in defeat. These weren't just isolated disputes. They were historic blows that really broke the back of the labor movement in those countries. This anti-union vibe even spawned a whole new business. Get this. The source highlights that in the US alone, a union avoidance industry, where you hire consultants to help you fight off organizing drives, grew into a $4 billion a year sector. And the impact was just stark. I mean, just look at the numbers in the UK. In 1979, when Thatcher came in, there were over 13 million union members. By 1995, that number had been chopped nearly in half. And you saw a similar drop across a lot of Western countries. So with the unions weaker and the rules on finance gone, the global economy fundamentally changed. It became way more of a roller coaster, kicking off an era of one financial crisis after another. Because now, massive amounts of money could race around the globe with almost no restrictions, creating this crazy domino effect. The first big domino to fall was Mexico in 1994, which set off a major financial crisis that echoed all through Latin America. And that was followed just a few years later by the massive Southeast Asian financial crisis. The source notes that this single event pushed an estimated 100 million people right back into poverty. And all of that, it was really just the warm-up act. In 2008, the global financial crisis hit, a meltdown that brought the entire world economy to its knees. The source argues that these big economic shifts had a direct and, frankly, devastating human cost. Decades of progress on income inequality were just wiped out. Poverty and job insecurity went up, even in the richest countries. Work itself became more intense, more pressurized, a process the author calls the dehumanization of work, where hitting productivity targets became more important than human well-being. And you saw systemic problems get reframed as individual failings, while social issues like mental health got way worse under all the strain. But, this story isn't just one of decline. This profound shift in society did not go unchallenged. The source also makes a point to highlight some really significant moments of resistance, a fight back. One of the first major victories against this whole new agenda actually came from France. In 1995, a huge wave of public sector strikes with massive popular support basically paralyzed the country and forced the government to back down on its austerity plans. It was a huge signal that this new order could actually be challenged. And that resistance soon got more organized, and it went global. You saw new social movements pop up, most famously the World Social Forum with that motto, "Another world is possible." They connected activists and unions and everyday citizens from all around the world, turning these isolated local fights against privatization into a powerful, united global counter-narrative. And that brings us right up to today. The source describes the welfare state not as just some static set of policies, but as the temporary result of a power struggle between two competing visions for society. We've walked through its rise, the powerful assault against it, and the resistance that came after. So the final question it leaves us with is a big one. Was that the end of the story, or are we just living in the next chapter of that very same battle?